Maria, piena di grazia, il Signore è con te. Sei benedetta fra le donne, grazia, il Signore è con te. Sei benedetta fra le donne, benedetto è il frutto del tuo seno, Gesù. Ave Maria, piena di grazia, il Signore è con te. Sei benedetta fra le donne, benedetto è il frutto del tuo seno, Gesù. Maria, piena di grazia, il Signore è con te. Tu sei benedetta fra le donne e benedetto è il frutto del tuo seno, Gesù.
Laudetur Jesus Christus, praised be Jesus Christ, and welcome to this broadcast of the conclave to elect a new pope. We're coming to you live from St. Peter's Square, where hundreds of pilgrims and curious tourists have come to see whether the smoke from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel this morning will be black or white.
Over the next couple of hours or so, we'll be exploring the history, as well as our own memories of previous conclaves, the ongoing Jubilee of Hope, and our memories and the legacy of the late Pope Francis. I'm Christopher Wells.
And I'm Devin Watkins, and we're joined for this live commentary this morning by our colleague in St. Peter's Square, Kelsey Gussie. We'll hopefully be joining with her this couple of times this morning. And three of our guests who have been in Rome for many decades, Paulist Father Greg Appercell, Joan Lewis, and Dr. Don Prudlow.
And as you know, if you've seen the broadcast last night, of course, after a rather long and perhaps unexpectedly long wait, we did see the black smoke at right about 9 o'clock last night. I think everybody was expecting it a little earlier. I know the crowd in the square was a bit anxious at that point. There were several rounds of applause where I think people were encouraging the cardinals, who of course can't hear anybody, to proceed with the election. As you probably know, there's one election after the cardinals go into conclave. That event happened last night, or we showed that on Vatican Radio. And subsequently, we will be having 2 elections, if necessary, in the morning and 2 in the afternoon going forward. We are expecting smoke possibly at the first vote this morning. If that happens, it will signify a valid election and will be white. If not, instead of burning the ballots, if the election does not go through, they immediately proceed to a second scrutiny, as we call it. And after the second vote, there will certainly be smoke, either black or white. So we're in for 2 or 3 hours perhaps this morning, and we'll continue to bring you coverage and commentary on the papal election.
And we thank you for joining us this Thursday morning of May 8th. Some of you may be following us on our various Vatican media channels, perhaps the Vatican News app or the Radio Vaticana app, the Vatican News web portal, or Vatican News English YouTube channel or Facebook Live feed. We also welcome all of you who are joining us through our partner broadcast stations. And as Chris was mentioning, this broadcast will last until we see the smoke rising from the chimney. And if we see black smoke, that means the cardinals have not agreed on the next pope, and so we'll close the signal shortly afterwards.
And of course, white smoke will mean that a pope has been elected. There are 133 cardinal electors, and a full 2/3 majority is necessary for the election. That means that to be elected, the next pope will have received at least 89 cardinal electors who have decided on the man that will lead the Catholic Church into the future. At that point, we will continue the broadcast until the Pope has appeared on the balcony. Perhaps some of you remember the last election or previous conclaves. There is a period of time between the white smoke and the appearance on the balcony of the new Pope. We'll continue our live broadcast throughout all of that, and then at least until the Urbi et Orbi blessing, the new Pope's first blessing of the city of Rome and of the whole world.
And maybe we could get our guests to introduce themselves and tell us a little about your history here in Rome. Father Greg?
I'm Father Greg Appercell. I'm the Vice Rector at St. Patrick's Church, San Patrizio, the church for Catholic Americans here in Rome. I was the Vice Rector of Santa Susanna beginning in 1996, and then after 6 years took a break, went back to the States, and then came back in 2004 to be the Rector until our church closed in 2013. And eventually we moved into St. Patrick's Church, where I was the Rector for a while, and at the invitation of Pope Francis himself to move to that church, as the Irish Augustinians were going back to Ireland. And in between that time, I was Director of Formation for Paulus Seminary in Washington, D.C., and then came back here again in 2013 to support our new pastor, Father Matt.
And so how many popes have you seen, Father Greg?
How many popes have I seen? 3.
3, okay.
Hopefully 4.
All right. And Joan, tell us a little about yourself.
Well, Joan Lewis. I've been in the Eternal City for over 4 decades, and part of that time I worked actually at the Vatican in the press office, Vatican Information Service for many years under Pope John Paul, but basically a lot of my life has been dedicated in some way through the media to covering the Vatican, the Pope, and the Catholic Church. And after, shall we say, I retired from the Vatican, I did have a show here at Vatican Radio for 20 years called Joan Knows. And that was a huge joy. I have a similar radio show today for EWTN. I was the first bureau chief of EWTN in Rome. Came in 2005. We opened that office. And the popes that I have known, the first pope in whose presence I was John the 23rd. The subsequent popes are the ones I spoke to and got to know, if you will, and cover. And that would be Paul VI and John Paul I, actually. I was here for his election and first Mass. John, he, of course, was Pope for an extraordinarily brief time. When John Paul II was elected, I was in Cairo, Egypt. And then for Benedict, by that time, I was working for the Vatican, and so covered Francis for EWTN. So a lot of history with popes.
Dr. Don, you've also been here a long time, so tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Thanks. I am the Warren Professor of Catholic Studies at the University of Tulsa, and I've been coming to Rome for nearly a quarter century. I remember working with Vatican media for the last conclave for the installation of Pope Francis. And I'm also a scholar, a medieval scholar. I work a lot at the Vatican Library. And we've been here so often. My son, who has a birthday in May, which is usually when we come, he's had more than half of his birthdays in Rome and not in the United States. So we're here quite often, and I'm very happy to help out my friends at Vatican Media.
And in fact, Dr. Prudlow, perhaps we can start with you. You are a professor of history. I know you have written a number of books, but you also specialize in medieval history. There's certainly many centuries of history behind the papal conclaves. Perhaps you could give us a brief rundown of historically how have we elected popes?
Well, we know that the first successors of St. Peter were appointed. When the Roman Church was small, each successor would appoint their next successor, and as the Church grew, as it grew massively in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, it became the prerogative of the Roman clergy. The people that knew the city the best, that knew the Church the best, would make that selection. The Roman clergy would meet, they would select a successor, and then he would be acclaimed by the people, he would be presented to the people. And so this became the normal way of doing things for nearly 500 or 600 years. As the papacy became more powerful, as it became known that the influence that it had throughout the Church and beyond the Church, we started to see interference by secular officials, by kings and princes and emperors. And so there was a long struggle to secure the religious office of the papacy that eventually culminated in the creation of the conclave. And the election was reserved to a special subset of the clergy of Rome that came to be known as cardinals, in Latin, the hinges of the Roman Church. And even today, we retain this practice. We saw last Sunday each one of the cardinals go to their titular churches, the ones where they were the nominal pastors of, and they celebrated Mass, they met the people of that parish. And so their title to be electors of the Pope comes from that connection, comes from that deeply Roman connection. So a bishop from Burma or from Singapore or from South Africa will be a Roman pastor and will participate in those elections. Even after the reservation of the election to cardinals in 1059, there was still the problem of external interference, and sometimes this external influence led to serious deadlocks within the college, especially as the college got quite small in the 13th century. There was a famous conclave, the longest conclave, from 1268 to 1271, in the beautiful town of Viterbo, that really led to much frustration on the part of the broader church, and eventually led the people of Viterbo, the leaders of Viterbo, to putting the cardinals on bread and water, and eventually taking the roof off where they were meeting to introduce them to the elements and encourage, let's say, a more hasty, quicker decision. Following this, the next pope, Blessed Gregory X, issued the constitution Ubi Periculum, which prescribed the conclave in largely the form that we have it today. And his constitution has been modified slightly, but it retains most of its force. This reservation survived through the papal sojourn in Avignon, and when they returned to Rome, the first election in the Sistine Chapel being in 1492, a significant year. And then being in Rome for most of the rest of the time. The most recent conclave outside the city of Rome was in Venice during the Napoleonic period in the year 1800, 1799 to 1800. And so what we see through the 19th century is a shortening of conclaves. Conclaves used to be very long, sometimes 3 months, 6 months. And then following the reign of Pius IX and the increasing availability of communications, these conclaves were enabled to become shorter and shorter. And so we see the modern average. We're very used to quick conclaves today. I think Cardinals are very sensitive to the media, to the way that they present themselves to the world, not wanting to be seen as divided. And so the conclave has averaged between 2 and 5 days over the last 150 years. But we can see that even today, that this exercises a fascination for Catholics and for those beyond the Church. And given the kind of tools that we have for outreach, for social media, for all of the different channels that we can offer these things to people, and people have responded. They see that this conclave, which is deeply, deeply rooted in history, is at the same time something that can draw people and show people the durability and the beauty of the Catholic Church.
Thank you, Devin. Thank you, Don, for a brief overview of a really fascinating history of 2,000 years of determining who is going to lead the Church of Jesus Christ as the successor of St. Peter. Perhaps now might be a good time to talk a little bit about the process as it currently stands. Devin, how do we go through the process of electing a pope?
Yeah, so Joan has seen more of these than most of us, and so maybe she could tell us a little bit about how about kind of the average of how many ballots it takes.
Well, this is a fascinating study, and it covers like from 1903 to today. We have, on average, the Pope is elected on the third day after about 8 ballots. Now, we had 3 popes, Pius XII, John Paul I, and Benedict, who were elected on the second day. And the shortest number of ballots ever was Pius XII. That was 3 ballots. But the longest day was 5 days, as you mentioned. So Francis, of course, was 2 days and 5 ballots. So not really terribly lengthy. We don't have any Viterbo times in there, thank the Lord.
And what about could you tell us a little bit about the process of the election, how they cast ballots?
Once the cardinals have entered into the Sistine Chapel and are locked therein, and only exit to go back, the cardinals residing, of course, now at the two Santa Marta residences, they are there and pretty much start voting right away when they get into there's a document, an amazing document, 1996, by Pope John Paul, called Universi Dominici Egregius. And it outlines absolutely, nothing is overlooked, from the death of a pope to the new pope coming out on the balcony with his name and wearing white. And when they voted, yesterday 1 vote and today 2 in the morning, and then if we have to proceed on, as you said, what they have is a rectangular sheet of paper. At the top is written in Latin, "I elect as the Supreme Pontiff," and each cardinal then fills out below that the name of the person he wants to see. And what I love is that John Paul it is mentioned that he should write it so it's legible, but the writing should not be recognized as belonging to any particular person, because any one of those cardinals would have signed documents, their signatures would be available.
And that's also why they burn the ballots too, so that there's no record and it was this cardinal voting for this one and this one got.
And any notes, if some cardinal is sitting there making notes during a vote, a note for himself or whatever, all of those notes have to be destroyed along with the ballots. And so then each ballot is folded twice. It is brought up and put into a container that has a slot in the top, and then you have the 3 cardinals who are the scrutineers, and they count the ballots. The names are mentioned. They're mentioned a second time. They're checked 3 ways. And by the way, if there is a vote, and it seems that will be the case this time, if there is a cardinal who is too ill to get to the Sistine Chapel, the 3 scrutineers go to him. And they take the vote in the same way. He has the same piece of paper. He has written the name down. That goes in that little slot. Then they go back to the Sistine Chapel, and of course that vote is valid and is counted. And when you get to, as was mentioned just minutes ago, when in this particular conclave they get to the number 89, the percentage, the 2/3 needed, that is the time when obviously that name is announced, that person is welcomed, and there is some time that passes between the white smoke is there.
Yeah.
Okay, wow, habemus papam. And then the person, it might be 20 minutes, it's just congratulations. All of his brother cardinals coming up, and then you put the vestments on. You go to the room of tears and put the white papal vestments on.
And in fact, when they do the balloting, all of this process is deliberately designed, as Joan mentioned. Every aspect of this is laid out in very precise detail, and it's precisely to ensure that there's no question about the validity and the conclusiveness of the election. Also, as Joan mentioned, when they do burn the ballots, they also burn all of the notes. However, a record is kept of the vote, which will go into a secret archive, which is only accessible to the popes, or if they choose to release that information. But we do keep a record so that when we do get the 89 votes, they will continue so that every vote is counted. That final vote is annotated and sealed. There's a whole process for that as well, where they bring in proto-notaries and other officials to certify and ensure the validity of the election. That's sealed up. And again, as Joan says, the new pope will go into the room of tears after he has accepted, after he has chosen a name, and we'll have some time in prayer. We'll be given the white vestment. And I think a lot of people know the story that they have 3 papal cassocks prepared, 3 white cassocks, small, medium, and large, so that whoever is elected will have something that at least roughly fits him. They actually bring in a tailor who can adjust it a little bit to make sure it works. And there's a wonderful story about John the 23rd, which I told last night. John the 23rd, you'll remember, Joan, was a stout, famously Italian peasant And when he was elected, the cassock, the large cassock, was not big enough for him. The tailor actually had to open it up in the back, and it was closed around him almost like a hospital gown, of course with his regular clothing, cardinalatial garments underneath. And that's how he appeared, although of course nobody could see that on the balcony.
Actually, if you go to our social media, our Instagram, you will see the images. We've got a couple of photos, and we've got a video of these 3 papal vestments that are white, sitting in the Room of Tears. You can actually see the Room of Tears if you go to our Instagram account at Vatican News. And we have our correspondent in the square, Kelsey Gussie. You can see on your screen if you're following on television. If you're not on radio, I'll tell you about it. We see the seagulls who have famously appeared. They're like locusts in Rome. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go to Kelsey Gussie, our correspondent in the square. So Kelsey, how are you? And so what could you give us a feel for what's going on in the square this morning? And have you talked to any of the pilgrims yet this morning? Thank you, Kelsey. Is there anything else that you'd want to tell us about the square and the preparations there? There's security to get in, I imagine? And I was in the square last night doing our live connections with the studio, and there were... one thing you have to say about the Italian civil authorities, whenever there is a major event in the Vatican, everything works like clockwork. You can't say anything bad about them because they are very professional, and the security was guaranteed. You remember the funeral mass. There were, over 200,000 or 400,000 in the area, and there were no incidents. There were over 80 heads of state and government. And there was serious concentration on the part of this Italian civil authorities to guarantee the security for everyone. And now we could... so thank you, Kelsey. We'll be coming back to you again soon. Last night when I was in the square, I spoke to several people, but one of them was a layman, a guy from Scotland, who had come in just precisely for the conclave. And he remembers when he was... he doesn't remember, but when he was John Paul II went to Scotland, his father lifted him onto the shoulders of John Paul II. And so here's a little clip of my interview with him last night. And so that was a young man named Patrick Grady from Scotland coming just for the conclave. I was at dinner yesterday evening, and I ran into another man who had come in from Munich, Germany, and he came in specifically for the conclave. He said as soon as he heard the news about the death of Pope Francis, he did his calculations, and he knew that the conclave would be this week. And so he came, he booked his tickets, he got a place on the Borgo, and was here. And so there are a lot of people who have come just for this historic event. I mean, it doesn't happen very often. We hope it happens as little as possible. And so maybe we could go back to a little bit to the proceedings. We were speaking about the Room of Tears, and Joan was mentioning the 3 boxes.
Yes, what I found astonishing, because we in the media all got the pictures, the 9 or so of the Room of Tears. And I noticed on a table some small square boxes. I don't know what would be in those, but there were 3 boxes the exact same size a shoes come in. So how do you, I can understand vestments, but how do you pick the size of shoes? You know, so that'll be interesting, because they don't want the prelate to go out with whatever he's wearing. They want the, I'm guessing, papal red shoes. So we shall see.
Well, it was papal red shoes, and then Pope Francis changed that. He came out with his black shoes. One thing about it, we probably won't know his shoe attire, because there's the tapestry. At least the first night, there's the tapestry on the balcony, and so you probably can't see his shoes.
Sure.
But Father Greg, maybe you could tell us about a change that Pope Francis brought in.
I had heard that there was a particular store in Rome named Gamarelli's who has traditionally made the white robes for the Pope. And Pope Francis has said, what happens to the ones that were rejected? Why can't we keep those and reuse them, or not reuse them, but use them for the first time to save money and to also make use of beautiful vestments that were made.
And in fact, while we're still on the topic of proceedings and different possibilities, I think one of the very interesting possibilities that we might see, although very, very unlikely, I think everybody would agree, is the possibility of someone being chosen who's not actually in the room. It's, as many people know, the only requirement for a pope is that it be a man who can be made a bishop. Historically, we've even seen bishops, not popes, but we've seen bishops who were not even Christian when they were elected bishop, and they had to go through baptism and ordination to all the minor orders, to the diaconate, to the priesthood, and then to the episcopacy. University Dominici Gregis, the document that controls conclaves, talks about the possibility of someone who's not a bishop being elected. I believe there's one cardinal in the conclave who is not a bishop. He's able to do that with a dispensation from Pope Francis. And if he were to be elected the Pope, the first thing you have to do after he accepts, the very first thing, it's very explicit, is you have to ordain him to the episcopate. But the interesting part of that is if someone is elected who is not a cardinal elector, and in that case we might see an older cardinal. Paul VI restricted the voting cardinals to cardinals under the age of 80, but there are certainly some cardinals with very strong personalities, pastoral records, who might be considered. They might be elected. There's also a possibility, we've seen this in the past, where a bishop or an archbishop, or even very famously a monk, Celestine V, who was elected, and in that case there's a procedure for the cardinals suspending the votes, because they have to be in contact with the man that is chosen to see if he'll accept. And in that case, we wouldn't have any smoke at all, and there would be a lot of speculation amongst the commentators and the analysts and the journalists as to what's going on in the conclave. And there's a lot of interesting possibilities for how do you contact someone who's chosen? How do you get him to Rome if he's not in the city? Even if he's here, how do you get him into the conclave? And we mentioned Pope Celestine V, whose name has come up more recently because he was one of the few popes to resign. And maybe, Joan, would you like to talk about maybe, very recently we saw the resignation of Pope Benedict, which is a little change in a very significant change in the history of the papacy.
Well, indeed, it was a shock because no one living on the planet at that time had known, I mean, it was centuries, before, from Celestine to Benedict. And the interesting thing was Benedict had been to the tomb of Celestine at one point, which people brought up when Pope Francis made a visit to the tomb of St. Celestine. When he was not doing well health-wise, does he have resignation on his mind? Is that some kind of sign? And of course, as we know from his ill health and how he died, it was resignation we knew was never on his mind. But it was a shock when Pope Benedict said it. And I think that, I remember when John Paul died, I was asked on television what was his greatest legacy, and I said his entire life, but he taught us how to die with dignity. And I felt that Benedict, with his resignation, because of his humility, his feeling he could not pursue the papacy as should be, the walking, the travels, and everything else. In his humility, he decided that he didn't care what anybody else said, he had to resign. And I just think it was a beautiful lesson on how to live. So with John Paul, how to die in dignity, and Benedict, how to live in dignity.
And the interesting thing about Benedict's resignation is that on a theological level, it could be said, and he was an eminent theologian, he knew what he was doing. He knew that he was stepping back and resigning and following in something that hadn't happened in 700 years. But following the theology of what his action was, it wasn't just that he was weak and that he couldn't do it anymore, that somebody was overpowering him, or whatever the speculation may have been at the time and still continues, is that he was making a point. He was saying the papacy is the power of the papacy is personal, but it's an office. It's not an elected. He is an elected monarch. He's one of the few absolute monarchs left in the world. But his office is just that. And so if he divests himself, as Benedict the 16th did, he's saying, I freely let this go. And so theologically, it puts the papacy in a little bit of perspective from that.
And interestingly, Celestine V was not the first pope to resign, probably. The early history of the popes is not always clear. Anyone who's studied a little bit of history knows that what we know about the past is very conditioned by the sources that we have, and even by the act of telling history over many, many centuries. He wasn't the first to resign, but the earlier popes, if they resigned, had resigned under pressure, if they were taken away into exile, if they were under threat of martyrdom. Again, there's a lot of confusion about what actually happened in those circumstances. So when Celestine became pope, he was pope for a short time, and I think it's fair to say he realized that he was not up to the burdens of the office in a time of great confusion for the papacy, with lots of influences going around. He actually had to commission a theological study and asked theologians of his day, is it possible for the Pope to resign? Because it was always perceived as a lifetime appointment. A bishop is considered symbolically, at least, to be married to his diocese, and certainly with the more important sees, like the Diocese of Rome, the bishop is given the bishop's ring, which signifies his espousal to the diocese. So there is a real question. Just as you cannot divorce your partner while they're still alive, can a pope symbolically divorce his church? And of course, they decided that clearly. Celestine was told, yes, it is possible for the pope to renounce or resign the papacy, and did so. And then, Devin, as you were talking about, Cardinal Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI, a very eminent theologian, did invest his act of resignation in complete freedom in a time when the church was, for all of the controversies of our day, the church is at peace, but did invest it with real theological import.
And we're sticking with the history, and so maybe we could go, we have a program put together by our colleague Lisa Zengarini, who will take us through a little bit from the The conclave and the form that we know, the one that started yesterday, is the 76th under this form, and this goes back to the Middle Ages, as we've said. And so this is also the 26th that's held in the Sistine Chapel, so under the gaze of Michelangelo's Last Judgment. So let's listen to this program from Lisa Zengerini, who tells us a little bit about the modern history of the conclave. And as we all know, that this year is the Jubilee of 2025, and what we're witnessing is a sede vacante, an interregnum period, a vacancy, and a conclave in expectation of a new pope. But this isn't the first time such an historic occurrence of events has unfolded. The Jubilee year of 1700 also saw the death of the Pope, the Innocent XII, in September of that year. The conclave was held, and Pope Clement XI was elected the successor of St. Peter. And Father Paul Samasumo runs us through in this program some of the highlights of that similar historical moment that took place 325 years ago. And while we're on the subject of the Jubilee year, Father Greg, could you tell us a little bit about the pilgrims? There, millions of people are expected to come to Rome, and some already have. So tell us about the
Yes, and some of the pilgrim groups have come to our church, St. Patrick's, from the United States. For instance, Archbishop Perez of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia came with 98 pilgrims and celebrated a couple masses in our church, which was wonderful to have them. And then, of course, the special jubilees are still going on, like the Jubilee of Bands and Entertainers is coming up on the 10th and 11th, and the Eastern churches after that, the confraternities, and then families. And so those are continuing, although the way it's going to be done until there is a pope is going to be, it'll be different. But we are seeing more and more pilgrims in May and June and July even. And there's the whole week of youth, the Jubilee of Youth at the end of July and the beginning of August, which will attract a lot of people.
Yeah, we know the canonization of Blessed Carlo Acutis was supposed to happen a couple of weeks ago.
27th of April.
27th, yeah.
Yeah,
Sunday.
And exactly, and now that it's just been suspended. So there's speculation it could happen later. It could happen. It will happen. But they've said it will. They will wait for the new pope to decide when and to confirm it. And so we're looking forward to this renewed jubilee in a way where everyone will be curious to come and see the new pope and to be here for the jubilee year and go through the holy doors.
And that's one of the things too, is they want information on how to go through the holy door, what to do before, after, during, and now we just took a group Santa Maria Maggiore, and so the added thing of going and pay honor to Pope Francis at his tomb, which is a beautiful experience for many people.
Well, for me, it's been interesting to talk to these pilgrims because they're very happy that there is a church for English speaking and for Catholic Americans in Rome. So they enjoy meeting those of us who are been members of the parish for years, and then meeting fellow pilgrims. So it's a wonderful gathering point.
Thank you. What about some of the liturgical events that are planned here in the next few days?
Well, what would always be on a papal schedule, as it is every bishop in the world, you're going to have the Ascension, of course, has to be celebrated. That is on Thursday, May 29th. Pentecost is on June 6th. And then you've got Corpus Christi on June 22nd. And that's always a very special event in Rome. So the new pope will be looking at a liturgical schedule and a jubilee schedule, lots of events as Father Greg outlined. Many months of events, but the liturgical would be right now, May and June, for sure.
And one of the things that all of the cardinals, as Dr. Don Prodlos mentioned earlier, is every cardinal has a titular church, and St. Patrick's, Father Greg, is the titular church of one of the cardinals in the conclave right now.
Cardinal Thomas Collins, he's the Metropolitan Archbishop Emeritus of Toronto, Canada, and he came to our church on Sunday, celebrated the 10:30 Mass, and gave a wonderful homily, which Joan can tell you about, and was very well received by the people. And we had a baptism of a child at that Mass too, which was nice.
No, that was truly, truly wonderful. But the great thing, Cardinal Collins has a wonderful personality. He laced his terrific homily with a good dosage of humor. But what he did was so beautiful. He had 3 readings, as we do every Sunday. 2 readings at Mass, and you have the Gospel. He took each of those readings, expounded on it briefly, and then named a quality associated with that reading, first reading, courage, and said this is a quality that a pope must have. The second reading, the quality was vision. A pope must have vision. And then the Gospel, which is the Gospel, of course, of Simon Peter being asked by the Lord, do you love me? And Simon Peter reaffirming strongly 3 times, you know, Lord, I love you. And Jesus says, go feed my sheep. And so the point being in the Gospel, a pope must have great closeness every moment of his day to Christ. So that was just beautiful. And I think to emphasize really what Greg said, the Cardinal made it very clear the Cardinals are electing the successor, Peter, the Vicar of Christ. Yeah.
And so he was Cardinal Collins was mentioning that he's a successor of Peter, right?
Right. He's not the successor of Pope Francis. He's the successor of St. Peter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things Cardinal Collins said during his homily was that this baptism that was taking place at the Mass was, he said, there are two important events that are taking place in the coming days. One is this baptism that's about to happen, and then the other is the election of the Pope. He said this election, in a way, the election, this new member's entry into the family of God, into the Christian family, that's an act of God, he said. And he said this conclave that's happening, this election of the Pope, that's an act of men. We are electing the Pope under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, but it's an election. It's we choose, and then God kind of confirms this choice and gives His grace of the Holy Spirit to the man who will lead the Church.
And as we pass the 11 o'clock hour, I would like to greet once again all those of you who may be joining us. Thanks also to our partners throughout the world, our partner stations. And a reminder that you can follow the conclave on our Radio Vatican app, the Vatican News web portal, or our YouTube or Facebook live links. We are at a point now in the morning where if a pope, where very likely the cardinals have proceeded to the first morning ballot. If a pope is elected, we would see white smoke, but if a pope is not elected, then we would go immediately to the second vote and wait until after that to get the smoke. Maybe, Joan, you've been a Pope journalist, Vaticanista for many years, and you've watched more than one conclave. Can you talk a little bit about what happens as the crowds are waiting to look at the smoke, and why we have that disjunction between possible smoke and possible not?
Oh, sure. Well, when people, they have an idea. I mean, they know the cardinals are meeting, it's Thursday morning, the cardinals are meeting for so many hours. Something is going to come out of that. And so the expectation, just people chit-chatting, but there's an excitement that you feel just walking in the square, just listening to people. But I have to say, the moment the white smoke comes out, the excitement goes into hysteria, because you have a person coming out, you don't know who it is, then you find out who it is, then you hear his name, and it's an awesome feeling. The void has been filled. We are no longer sede vacante, without a pope. So many things that can't be done because we were without a pope. So those of us in the church who know this particular aspect of it. But just the faithful, they want to know who their new Holy Father is. And it's an excitement beyond telling. I remember certainly for Pope Benedict, I was working for the Vatican at the time, and we had a very, very strong feeling that he would be elected early, that it would be Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger elected early. And there was great joy as those of us in the press office filed out and went into the square and rejoiced when we heard his name. And then covering the conclave of 2013, I was in the square, but I had to be on television at 8 o'clock, so I'm going back up, and I think it was sometime after 8 that this Jorge Bergoglio comes out onto the balcony, and there was a huge excitement in the crowd. We have a pope, even if we haven't quite heard his name yet. There's this man in white, and then with all the correspondents that were around us on the roof of the Augustinianum, it was like, what's his name? Jorge Bergoglio. What name did he take? Where's he from? So all the questions, and a lot of research had to be done, because when you have someone unexpected, as John Paul II was.
Yeah, he was totally unexpected.
Yes.
He was the one among the popable, or papabile, as they say.
Exactly.
He was overlooked. The church took a new direction.
But it's a real exciting feeling.
Yeah, Father Greg, have you seen any, were you around for any of the recent elections, or?
I was here for the election of Pope Francis, yes. And it was very exciting just being in, I was watching on TV, but then I went down and was around the area. And it was very exciting because it was something new and unknown, and what does it mean, and where are we going, and the whole difference between the fact that Pope Benedict had resigned, but he was still there, and then this new Pope, and how that would work, throughout the years that followed until the death of Benedict.
Well, the mere fact that he took the name Francis.
Yeah.
And journalists had to discover very quickly that you could not call him Francis the First, because a pope doesn't become the first until there is a second. And so
I remember I was watching rewatching.
I do have my little thing, like if I needed to, I've got it. I just kind of, okay, fine. Now I'm okay. Well, blueberry bar for lunch. welcome back to our special coverage of the papal conclave here on CNN. I'm Aaron Burnett. We are just outside the Vatican. We're day 2 of the cardinals voting to select the leaders of the day. There are 103 of them right now inside the Sixtine Chapel, and they will vote today up to 4 times to elect a new pope. Maybe fewer than 4, if they have it. 4 is the maximum number of votes today. And last night, darkness descended after hours of expectation and delay and waiting. There was black smoke coming from that chimney, which has been installed on the Sixtine Chapel, to indicate that the cardinals were unable to decide on new leaders. So let's go to our CNN senior international correspondent, Ben Wiedemann, here in Rome. And Ben, as we're here in St. Peter's Square, people are flooding in in anticipation, of course, of many hours of possible voting. Right now, there could already have been a vote. We wouldn't know unless the vote had been selected. There could be another vote coming in the next few minutes. We just don't know, but the crowds are filing in, and they will be waiting. outside the Vatican. We are waiting, and it is about 11:45 local time here in Rome. In the morning window here, there are 2 rounds of voting, and we are at 11:45. We have not yet seen white smoke. Christopher Lamb with me, our Vatican correspondent. That most likely means that they are done with the second round of voting, not have a program on the a lot of us are sure, but most likely that's where we are. And in that case, we'll see white smoke or black smoke before they go. happen? And how does the pressure build? I understand this can go on as long as they need it to go on. But there is also the desire on their part, at least we've heard from cardinals, that this be a swift process. When you hit lunch today, certainly we've only been going a day and a half. However, what is that pressure on?
Smoke has come out of the chimney above the Sistine Chapel. Everyone's got their phones out, taking videos of it. And we're going to connect now here shortly. Okay.
And in fact, that's what you see if you're watching on the television screen. I think all of us remember, at least all of us in studio remember, various elections and conclaves. And as soon as smoke starts coming out, the first question on everybody's lips, is it white or is it black? Happily, this time the black smoke has been very clear and is now as well. And when there is that moment, the crowd just goes silent as everybody's looking up and determining for certain what color is the smoke.
And on the modern means of communication yesterday in the square in the evening, whenever the smoke came out, it was dark. The sun had already gone down, and you could see the screens, and you can see on the square that it's a close up there. But those as soon as the smoke started coming out, those TVs turned off, and so that everyone would look up to the actual chimney and to focus on what's real and not just what's in front of our in front of our screens. And then it came back on, and you could see that the smoke was black. And now we're going to go live to Kelsey, who's in the square. Kelsey, what are you getting the sense of? Yeah, I think the first question, as Chris said, is it black or white? And the second question is, what am I having for lunch? Are my dinner reservations still valid?
Can I get into the restaurant with 20,000 people trying to get their pizzas and their pastas? I wonder if, yeah.
And it's interesting, you can see on the screen now that we've got the images, the square is not extremely full. There's heavy security to get in. You got to go through metal detectors. But the first part of the Via della Conciliazione is very full. That's a very packed area. And you can see people moving off, right, Kelsey? Yeah, because we're going to be back again this afternoon. That means the next possible smoke would be around 5:30. This is just a guess, more or less, of the indications that we've received. At that point, it would come out only if the first ballot elected a new pope. And so we would see white smoke only come out around 5:30 or 6 or so. Later this evening, for sure there will be a black or a white smoke at around between 7:30. It all depends on when the cardinals get started, and from there we will continue on, and we hope the cardinals are moving along in their voting process and guiding us toward the future of the church.
And again, very interesting phenomenon I think we saw last night. The square starts out almost not quite empty. There's always lots of people there, but it seems kind of sparse. And then people start filtering in. It fills up. But the moment, I think we all remember, the moment the white smoke comes out, everybody in Rome drops what they're doing. I remember John Paul II's, the conclave after John Paul II, and when Benedict was elected, people were actually leaving their cars by the side of the street and running to St. Peter's Square. We saw two of Pope Francis, which was later in the evening, and although it was not so dense when the white smoke came out, by the time he appeared on the balcony, all of St. Peter's Square, all the way up Via della Conciliazione, packed shoulder to shoulder with people. The whole world shows up.
Where we are right now, a sea of people coming, from
at the end of Via
Casa
Conciliazione,
Sant'Angelo, and just pouring into the Piazza Pia area, and then, as you said, down Conciliazione. There's no way you would have tried to go against the crowd. You would have been trampled, I think. But it was an astonishing thing.
And since this brings us to, we've seen the black smoke, that we do not have a pope yet. Voting will continue this afternoon. And with that, we're going to wrap up this broadcast. We thank you, Kelsey, for helping us out in the square, Eduardo, Father Greg Uppersell, Joan Lewis, Dr. Don Prudlow. We really appreciate all of your help and walking us through the intricacies of this historic moment here in Vatican City State. And so our broadcast will pick up again this afternoon at around 5 or 5:30, depending on the indications. And many thanks go to our in-studio sound engineers and our producers. And we thank you for joining us as we await the Cardinals' decision about who will lead the Catholic Church as the next Pope. I'm Devin Watkins.
I'm Christopher Wells. Thank you all for joining us. Also, be sure to follow throughout the day our website, as well as our social media accounts, Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube, where you can find out lots more information about the conclave, about the process of electing Pope, and join us again this afternoon for the next Chimney Watch for the conclave of 2025.
Laudetur Jesus Christus, praised be Jesus Christ.